Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd and this is my quick review of the new Wonder Woman movie. And I personally don't think it's the worst movie ever. It is definitely pretty bad, but it did have a few moments which I actually liked, and also a lot of those ridiculous action scenes which were pretty badly done were kind of unintentionally funny, and that's why I do think it has some entertainment value. It kind of reminds me of all those Bollywood movies, especially the action movies which are so ridiculous, so over the top that it's like a comedy, even if it's not intentional. If some movie tries so hard for some epic action scene, but it's just so badly done that it becomes a comedy unintentionally. And so I'm actually a fan of those kinds of things, and a lot of the action scenes in this movie are kind of like that. They're not just bad, they're so bad that they become a comedy. And therefore, I have to give them some points. But the few moments that I actually genuinely liked about the movie were all those scenes with all kinds of nostalgia about the 80s and all of that, the way they made everything look in that time period, including people's clothing and fashion sense. A lot of the men in that time period had mustaches. And in this movie, maybe they kind of over exaggerated it more than it was in reality, but I still, once I noticed that, I kind of, it became funny to me. And that moment when Chris Pine gets to the future and he's kind of like a fish out of water and he has to get used to this new future, which is our past. And so that was like a double enjoyment factor for those scenes, in my opinion, because on the one hand, we have something interesting, which is a character from the far past who arrives what is to him the future. So that was interesting. And at the same time, that's our past. And it's kind of nostalgic, especially for those who grew up in the 80s and all of that, who remember that kind of stuff. So I thought all those scenes were actually good. Not amazing, not excellent, but I did enjoy some of those moments, some of those scenes, and so that's why I cannot say it's the worst movie ever, because it did have a few scenes, a few moments which I actually liked. Now, the plot itself is obviously ridiculous, and the action scenes were ridiculous, but maybe even in a good way, and the villain was ridiculous and obviously kind of inspired by a real life figure in current politics and all of that, and so that was maybe a little bit kind of distracting, because I kept thinking, maybe they should have gone even with a bigger imitation. Like, go all the way, that at least would make it funnier, because they kind of did it half-assed, just slightly similar, but not all the way, and they even made him kind of sympathetic villain and all of that, because he had a small kid. And in some ways, I think the villain character was maybe the most developed character in the whole movie, because at least you can kind of, you see his backstory a little bit and stuff like that. So the villain was actually maybe more interesting than all the other characters. And there was that nerdy woman character who at first was kind of interesting character. I thought, oh, that's nice, but then it became kind of totally ridiculous. She just turned to the evil side right away and all of that. So that was not well done. And especially that final fight was ridiculous and not in a good way. It was just bad. And the way she looked like a giant cat and all of that, it kind of reminds me of that movie Cats, which, by the way, I also don't think was the worst movie ever. I recently watched part of it on TV, and I remember hearing everybody saying that it's the worst movie ever. I watched a part of it, and I'm not sure why it's the worst one ever, because at least you can close your eyes and listen to the songs. The music itself is not that bad, and so it does have some entertainment value, so I'm not sure I would call that movie the worst one ever either, even though I admit I didn't watch all of it, I just watched a few scenes. But anyway, back to this movie. So I don't think it's the worst movie ever, because it did have some okay moments, at the beginning. The acting wasn't terrible. The special effects were definitely ridiculous in a lot of places, but as I explained, it might be fun in its own way. And also, all of this is based on a comic book, so obviously they have to do things from the comic book, and the invisible plane and all that ridiculous stuff, which I do think is ridiculous, but I can understand that they're doing a homage to the source material, so that's why I can kind of forgive it. Now, something that does annoy me is the fact that this movie doesn't seem to fit with the other movies in this franchise continuity-wise, because how come all these crazy events happened, and yet later on, Batman has no idea that it ever happened. No one ever recognized Wonder Woman, I guess, and he has all those resources and all of that, and yet there is no indication of something like this happening in the future of supposedly the same timeline, and so that lacks continuity with the other movies, because we saw the future of this. We saw Wonder Woman with Batman in those other movies, and Batman seemed to be totally unaware about any of the amazing events in this movie. If something so big happened in the past, how come he has no idea about it? So how come we don't see any ramifications of that? So it was a little bit too ridiculous. to fit it with the other movies, and also, the magic elements, I don't really like it. One of the few things I actually liked in Man of Steel was the fact that it was trying kind of to be science fiction, kind of much more realistic and not just magic powers and all of that, and yet the other movies just went full magic, and I personally enjoy science fiction more than magic, and yet this movie is once again much more magic than science fiction, so to me personally it loses points immediately, and it's hard to take anything seriously when magical things can happen, and also the whole idea of the wish fulfillment, that everyone gets to fulfill their wish, it doesn't make any sense logically, even if we can accept that some kind of magic can exist. Still, how would you explain what happens if someone wishes someone else to die and that same person says, I want to live forever, so he cannot die, so what would happen in that situation? So maybe this movie should have explored kind of more crazy scenarios, just for the fun of it, just to make it full comedy, then maybe it would be better, but it was kind of trying to be realistic while being so ridiculous at the same time, and so it didn't really work well most of the movie, except some of the action scenes, as I mentioned, which were so ridiculous they were funny. Especially that car chase scene somewhere in the middle of the movie, that was just so over the top, so ridiculous, that I did kind of laugh at it. And there are all kinds of other illogical things even before all the magic starts, like at one point they steal a plane from a museum which is somehow fully fueled, and Chris Pine can pilot it even though it's nothing like the planes that he knew, and then they fly all the way to Egypt somehow, so I guess by magic, just like she made it invisible, maybe she also gave it fuel by magic. So all kinds of ridiculous stuff like that. And there was also something very disturbing about that plot line with Chris Pine possessing someone else's body after she wishes him back, and then they sleep together, and at no point in the whole movie did any of them raise the question of it being immoral to keep this guy's body and to kind of take over his life and never give him back his body, and then to sleep with his body and all of that. So it's kind of like rape almost. And in the end of the movie, when Chris Pine disappears and that guy comes back, and then Wonder Woman meets him, and then she kind of looks him over and looks kind of down at his pants, I guess, and then tells him that she enjoyed his something, and then she said something else, but the implication was clear that she enjoyed his body, and he doesn't know that he was exploited in that way. So isn't that kind of like rape? Isn't that immoral? And at least if they discuss this in the movie, if at some point in the movie they said that maybe it's part of the reason that she gave back her wish so that that guy will get his life back, if that was at least some small part of her motivation, if it was mentioned at least briefly, then I could have forgiven all of this, but it was never even mentioned by anyone in the whole movie. So what kind of heroes are these when they don't even raise this question? Like, you don't have to do it right away. I could have forgiven that if they said, oh, we just love each other so much, we have to be together one last time before we give that other guy his life back. Fine, I could have forgiven that, but they never even raised that question. And if not for all the chaos that was happening, they never would have done that, apparently, according to this movie. And so that makes them look kind of evil. So that was maybe the most ridiculous part in the whole movie. It kind of reminds me of the first season of Stargate Universe, which also had that kind of plot device which could transfer someone's consciousness to someone else's body, and that way, even though they were somewhere in far space, they could still communicate with people on Earth by possessing other people, and then some of them went over to their wives or loved ones and had sex with them in the body of another person who gave it to them simply so that they could communicate with other people, and they never asked the permission, and they just used their bodies to go and have sex with different people. And all of that was really creepy and cringy and all of that, and that was one of the many reasons I really disliked Stargate Universe in the first season. So it kind of gave me flashbacks to that, kind of creepy. I guess it's kind of also similar to Quantum Leap and stuff like that, but I don't remember if Sam Beckett ever did that, if he ever exploited someone else's body under false pretenses. And I think in one episode they even said that he doesn't actually possess bodies, that actually it's his own body that appears in the place of the other person who then goes to the future at the same time or something like that. So it's not like he was using their bodies to do things, but still it would be like almost like rape, because it would be under false pretenses, as if he's pretending to be a different person and then sleeps with someone. That would kind of be immoral. But I don't really remember that show. I remember I watched it as a small kid, and it had the same kind of idea across the whole show. And as far as I can remember, Sam Beckett was pretty much a gentleman for the whole show, and he never did anything immoral as far as I can remember. And there was also an episode of Star Trek TNG when Picard went back in time, but it was into his own body. and then he made different choices and all of that, and he did sleep with his friend from the academy, and but it was all in his own body, and so it was not false pretenses, and it was not exploiting someone else's body. It was about going back in time and making different decisions. So it's not the same. And yet in this movie we have one of the heroes possessing another man's body and then exploiting him and living his life instead of him. And never once did they ponder the possibility that, maybe it's not such a nice thing to take over that guy's body. Maybe we should consider all of this, and maybe that should have been at least one of the points that would have convinced Wonder Woman to give her wish back in the end. But it was never raised in the whole movie, and therefore it's creepy and cringy and pretty bad. And also it was stupid that she said at one point you don't have a passport, and yet he's living in the body of another person who does probably have a passport, so why didn't they check it? And when he looked in the mirror, he could see the other person. That means that everyone else except for Wonder Woman also sees the other person. And so none of this made any sense. It was immoral, and the only parts I did like in the movie, as I said, was all those nostalgic moments of showing us all the stuff from the 80s. I did think it was mostly well done. And some of the action scenes were indeed ridiculous, but so bad it's good. And so that's why I can't say it's the worst movie ever, but I do think it's pretty bad, and I don't really recommend this movie to anyone, especially because we'll probably be able to see all those funny bits in YouTube videos, so there is no reason to watch the whole movie. We can just watch the funniest parts in all kinds of compilations or parody videos or whatever, and so thank God there is YouTube and we don't have to watch a full movie just to see one or two good scenes. So that's why I don't recommend anyone to watch the full movie unless you want to watch a bad movie. If you're in that kind of mood, you want to watch something to poke fun at, then I guess you might enjoy some of it. And so that's my review. Let me know what you think and we can discuss it in the comment section below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.